Hey there, horror fans, and welcome to episode 85 of Funny Books Splatter, a horror comics podcast brought to you by HorrorTalk.com. I am your host, JFerguson. This week, I spoke with Laszlo Tamasfi, the writer of the anthology webcomic The Observatory, soon to be collected with some all-new material from Caliber Comics. Laszlo is a longtime listener of the show and has been breaking into the comic industry with a number of one-page horror stories. They're all collected in this new book called Caliber Presents Volume 4, The Observatory, due out on November 28th. In related news, my audio troubles never cease. Something happened halfway through this recording where my audio completely dropped out. Laszlo's is fine, but mine vanished. I did my best to recreate the conversation, but it's going to sound a little weird. My apologies, guys. I'm trying. If you have any suggestions on how I might combat these issues, I'm all ears. Hit me up at jferguson@horrortalk.com. Laszlo can be found online at his official site, LaszloTomasfi.com, and on Twitter as L Tamasfi. That is it for the intro this week, so let's get right to it. Here is episode 85 of Funny Books Splatter with my guest, Laszlo Tamasfi. Usually I give like a rundown as to like how the show goes, but if you're already a listener, then it saves me a step today.
Yes, I am I love your podcast. I'm definitely a listener. I did want to. It's okay if we run over it.
All right, let's dive in. So, the way I like to start the show, as you know, is to ask you to pitch your book. So if you are out on a convention floor, you run into someone in the elevator or something, and you have to pitch Observatory, how would you explain the book to them?
All right, so I would say The Observatory is like a collection of flash fiction comics. So each page is a short, standalone, self-contained story, almost like a bizarre version of the Twilight Zone. Mm-hmm. And so they were originally published as part of a webcomic, and then we collected it into a book and created this Lovecraft-inspired framing story to go with it. And
so that framing device was only in the Caliber Comics graphic novel version?
Yes, it was made specifically for the collected edition of this story. Yeah. Okay.
So how this is fascinating to me because first of all, like webcomics is something that I have like a love-hate relationship for them. I deeply appreciate that they exist. I just have such a hard time keeping up with them. So I forget that they're there, and then I'm like, oh, I missed, 3 weeks worth of this, and I have to just like frantically try to click through everything to get there, or I'll just now, with the advent of Kickstarter, where all these webcomic creators are collecting stuff and putting it out there, I can get everything in one collection now. So was this kind of started as a way for you to kind of test out the comics world and get your work out there and host it on the web to start?
Oh, absolutely. I really wanted to create something, and it's really hard to have an artist commit to any long form comic book. Mm-hmm. So I figured I'll go to the opposite direction, and it's a much more practical way to do it. It's not a huge risk for the artist to try out, do one page. So even if the webcomic doesn't go anywhere, they have a complete short story that they can show as well. So it was definitely made as almost like a calling card, just to show off the type of horror stories I like.
Yeah, I mean it's funny because like people say to start small, and when they say start small, it's like a one shot or like a 5 to 8 page story, and you literally boiled that down even further. So you have 1 page stories in this. Like that is a whole other challenge, I think, of like trying to tell a story that has a beginning, middle, and end in a single page. So that is a testament to your work right off the bat, and to being able to kind of to get all these out there. And you're right in that getting an artist to commit to a longer form is one thing, but getting them to commit to a single page, like that is like a day. So like most folks, if you're working with them, could probably spare a day here and there, especially between projects and stuff like that. So first of all, like let's dive into the single page aspect of this. So that is again fascinating to me. So I guess why just 1 page? Like, 'cause that just seems like it's so short?
So it was originally inspired by the Warren Ellis website, and I don't know if you're familiar with it, but he often hosted like 3-panel comics on his site, and it really worked. So originally I wanted to do, it wasn't just one page. I wanted to do one page, but 3 panels only. And I abandoned that. So I have, I'm sure you noticed I have 4 or 5 one panel, all kinds of different versions of the 1-page format. And it was a nice structure. I wanted to experiment with it. So I knew that not all of it will work, but I hope that enough of it will work to experiment. I don't know.
Well, no, that makes sense. So you're kind of playing around and testing the limits of the medium and seeing what works for you as you're kind of, getting your I don't know what the term I want to use, like sea legs under you, like getting your bearings in the comics world and say, okay, this is how this can work. And again, that's what everyone says, is to start small. So now if you were able to write this many single page stories, now blow that up and expand upon those. Because honestly, each one of those, you called it a calling card. Each one of those is like a pitch for a comic practically. So you could probably expand at least half of those into, if not a short story, a one shot as well. So do you intend to expand on any of those as kind of like the initial ideas in these one pagers?
No, it's quite the opposite.
Oh, really?
Almost, I wanted to burn through as many great ideas as I could, just to show like it. I just wanted to have those muscles exercise and just come up with plots and ideas and just burn through as many as I could. And then I'm just crossing fingers that I didn't run out. Like I'm just hoping that whatever I do next, I'm sure it will come.
Yeah. Well, yeah, everyone, I guess, every writer has like a notebook full of ideas, and I guess the hope is you didn't burn through all of them in your first anthology.
I actually noticed the opposite. As a writer, you tend to sit on ideas, especially comics. It takes so long from even just writing it to having it be done. This way, when I was actively doing the webcomic, I could write a script, and in 2 weeks, if I had the artist lined up properly, in 2 weeks I could have it published on my website. So that was really liberating and also very fulfilling. So, and just getting the ideas out of the way and not sitting on them for 4 or 5 years. Yeah. It was nice.
Yeah, and you're in control of your own destiny in that regard, because if as soon as you recruit the artist, you get everything up and running, and you could have that turned around and just thrown out there. Did you have like a regular schedule for the webcomic? Like, was it posted like once a week or something like that?
It was every Wednesday when I could. So most of the times it was like clockwork. And then what happened, we usually were on schedule for 4 or 5 months and then took a month off to regroup. But it was pretty steady. It was pretty reasonable. That's
no different than how, most Image comics are published right now. Is, they'll get 3 or 4 issues or 4 or 5 issues in the can, and then take a month off to release a trade paperback, and then repeat the process. So yeah, you're on a similar schedule, so people should be used to that and getting a burst of comics right away, and then taking a little bit of a break to kind of everyone seems to respect it now. Is what I'm getting at. Like, everyone knows, artists need a break, writers need a break. We'll catch up a little bit, and then you get another regular schedule coming through.
Yes, and I think it's actually definitely better for the work. Like, it's not only that it makes it a little bit more like, I'm talking mostly about the Image comic way of doing it, because this way you can not only regroup but also have your story structured to be these blocks, which end up usually being trades. Instead of just this continuous stream of years and years of just trying to push out the story, you know?
So how did you go about recruiting the artists for this? Because you have at least a dozen or so artists that you've worked with throughout Observatory. So how did you go about finding all of those?
Yes, and that was by design. I really wanted to make the webcomic feel like really colorful. As I was the only writer, so I wanted to make sure that it has some variety in the art. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, like there's one artist, Gergely Leposa. I actually grew up with him, went to middle school, high school together. He's one of my oldest friends. But most of the artists I met on comic book forums online. It's crazy how many people you can connect to. It's great.
Well, especially in the comics field, like it's such a positive and like welcoming kind of environment and industry that, you know, it's like, hey, do you want to make comics? I want to make comics. Let's make comics together. And then all of a sudden you're just off to the races and making comics and telling stories and stuff. So, and plus it's like trying out stuff. So it's like, okay, like let's see how this guy works. And again, your kind of cost of entry is so low. It's like you're looking for a single page here. Like it's like, what's the risk involved? Like worst case scenario, like if they get involved and they find out you're a jerk or something, it's like, well, worst case I lost a day. And then I'm back into the swing of things.
I tried to make it as low risk as I could. So that was the idea.
So how long, I guess, between the webcomic being online and then publishing with Caliber? Where did that connection kind of come from?
Yes, so the webcomic started in 2014, and after 3 years, I started to feel like it's time to wrap it up. And I also really liked what we did. Like I was really proud of the mm-hmm. work. And so that's when I started to think about collecting it into a book. And I very quickly learned that just putting 100 one-page stories into a collection is a terrible reading experience. Like it will make you dig out your eyeballs. It's really a lot. Mm-hmm. So I knew I had to like structure it to make it a real book. I didn't want it to be just a novelty webcomic collection. I wanted to make sure it stood on its own legs mm-hmm. as a collection. And so I basically organized the framing story the same way I did the webcomic itself, just reaching out online to artists. And Jeremy Ray, who did I guess the story could be called The Observatory, the framing mm-hmm. story. He's a fantastic artist, so I really lucked out. And then once the book was completed, I submitted to a handful of publishers, and Caliber was the first one to reach out to me, and they seemed really excited. So it felt like a good match to go with them.
That's great. Yeah. So you're able, and for those submissions, were you just kind of putting them, whatever like open submissions were out there, and just throwing it out there and see what stuck?
Yeah, that's exactly what I did.
As simple as that. Like those, I feel like some folks feel like that when a publisher has open submissions like that, sometimes it's just, oh yeah, you know, that's just like a formality. It's not there. Like no one's really looking at that email. But you know, it's cool to hear that someone, you know, obviously was reading it, and you're able to get the book out there and out and published into the world.
Yes, it's. I'm really happy with my experience with Caliber Comics. Again, like the book was completely done when I reached out to them, so the only editorial input was like just to go through, clean up some of the mm-hmm. grammar, I guess. English is my second language. I did my best, so it wasn't too bad, but I needed just a little bit of a TLC, and then we are soliciting the book now in previews, and hopefully it will be in comic book stores in November, I guess.
That's great.
So
yeah, it looks like so. Yeah, and one of the things I wanted to make sure I clarify with you is that like the book is listed as Volume 4, but it's like Caliber Presents Volume 4, so it's not Volume 4 of the Observatory, right?
yes, so the official title of the book is Caliber Presents Volume 4, The Observatory. And it's just their anthology series, and this is the 4th volume. And yes, so it's a completely standalone book.
Yeah, and that's it sounds like it's like a perfect fit in that regard because people can kind of dive into this horror anthology series where it's like it's kind of jumping into there, but you get a full story. You get the entire experience of the webcomic plus this observatory kind of story that weaves through everything in one shot.
Yes, and I think it fits into the series, and I don't know. I'm very excited to have it be part of it.
That's got to be a great feeling, you know. Now, so is it in previews in now, or is it about to be?
In September. So I think yes, right now. I think stores should be getting the catalog this week. Which I'm sure only makes sense to some of your American listeners because the distribution system is another nightmarish story we could talk about. But yeah.
Well, that's the fun of fun of quotation marks there of American comics, I guess, is that everything kind of has to go through Diamond, but because there isn't much of an alternative. But I guess, do you have distribution outside of the States too?
Well, I know the book is on Amazon. It's already available. And I believe it will be through the publisher's website and Barnes & Noble, which I don't know if they do overseas. But my understanding is that, yes, you can probably get your hands on the book.
Yeah. So, yeah, if anyone wants to check it out. And plus, like, the Observatory webcomic, is that still online, too?
Most of it is. And the framing story is not, just to make it. I wanted to make that an exclusive to the book. But most of these shorts you can still
so
find.
that way people can try it out before ordering it too. So you get a nice taste for free here, but then understand that there's more that kind of weaves everything together and frames the stories a little bit more and kind of gives you reason to understand it. Like I did like that as a plot device of explaining like why all these stories are here. So because the stories on their surface are completely disconnected. There's not like a central character or anything that shows up in each one of these stories. It's all different stuff, all these different types of horror comics, horror stories. So this kind of gives it this framework of explaining why all these things are popping up. Like, you didn't necessarily need that in the scheme of things, and I guess that's why it worked as a webcomic, but I think you're right in that it can be a little tough to read if you're going to sit down and read all this at once, because, I don't know, like, I feel like the brain has a hard time understanding where it's like, just when you're starting to grab onto something, you turn the page and there's a completely different story, and then a completely different story, so you have to kind of, like, keep up. So I think it's almost like you want to read this book in like smaller doses to kind of get the full effect.
Yes, and it was definitely true for the webcomic as well. I know that our weekly readers had a slightly better experience. I hope everybody liked it, but people who just discovered it and tried to read through all the back catalog definitely had to bookmark it and go back, because it can be pretty heavy. But
because I mean the variety that you have in here, like, it's not just like, and here's another one page zombie story. It's like everything, and like really it gets into some really dark places. I mean, you had mentioned before, like, this is some of like the favorite kind of horror stories for you. So what can you define that a little bit more? Like, what is it about the genre that has kind of pulled you into it? What are your favorite parts of it that has resonated within the Observatory?
I really like. I'm not really interested in scaring my audience, which is maybe not a great tagline for a horror comic. Like, we're not interested in scaring you, but my number one goal was to make it really interesting, and as ambitious as it sounds, I wanted to write something that you haven't quite read before. So each story, I just wanted to consciously think of very different tones. And honestly, this is probably an out of the blue inspiration, but Asimov had these short story collections collecting the best science fiction short stories of the 50s. And this is what I grew up on. So it was, each year had its own collection, and great decade for science fiction. And when I was a teenager, I just sat down to read these collections, and each story had this very different but brilliant tone. And I don't know, so I just tried to recapture on my own humble way, that feeling of like not knowing what the next thing will be.
It is interesting, when you put it that way, that sums up the book very well, because you turn the page and you have no earthly idea what you're in for. So it could be anything. It could be it's just like there's no like way to predict this, and with that, because it is one page stories like that, like you just turn the page and it's completely something different. And even like if there's something you're like, oh, I didn't really care for that one, well, the next one is a completely new story, and you're gonna dive into that and see like some crazy ass demented story that it's like, oh my god, like that. What? That's why I was so curious if you planned on expanding any of these, because some of these I'm like, oh, I need to see this world more. I need to see more about what are the rules in this thing. Like that, if this is just your starting point, almost like where else can this thing go? And it seems like there's like a lot of possibilities with some of these stories.
Yes, and I might expand on some of the ideas, but I had a lot of suggestions to stop limiting these stories to one page. But I was really stubborn about it. I don't know. I just like, that was the format. I really, in a strange way, I got off on the idea of just showing people that I can maintain this level of intensity. Like each story should feel like the beginning of something bigger, or like almost like a slice of a larger story, but hopefully still satisfying. But I feel like if I actually sat down and wrote each of these stories, that's 15 years of writing. So I guess I got it out of my system.
Well, look, and if it worked out for you in the end, so all those people that told you to not do the single page thing, like, you're the one who's getting published in a couple months. So, like, let's be real here,
Yeah.
So aside from Asimov, I mean, Asimov is definitely on the sci-fi side of the house, although like there are some elements that'll dabble in the horror angle. Was that kind of like you're into this genre?
Maybe. I also grew up with my parents were big readers, and I was a kid in the late 80s, early 90s, so there was a lot of Stephen King laying around books. So that's why I could not wait to be old enough to read it. So Stephen King was a big one, Clive Barker, and in movies, a huge David Cronenberg fan. So I'm a huge fan of The Fly, all those other movies. And in comics, I came to horror comics late, because I came to the United States in 2001, and I'm from Hungary. So at that time, there was not any real comic book publishing in Hungary. So when I came here, that was the first time I got my hands on the Sandman.
Wow.
And that was the big one. I had to catch up on all the Vertigo titles. I absolutely love the Sandman.
Yeah, that's a great one to start with too. Like that I feel like is such like an eye-opening comic too. That was when I was getting back into comics. I read Preacher and then Sandman. Those were like the first two, and I like devoured. I would go every week to the comic book store. I wasn't buying single issues yet, but I would just every week buy the next trade paperback in the series. And that's the Preacher has 9 books. I think Sandman has 10 or 11. So it was just like a constant thing where like every week I'm like, all right, it's like put down the money, like give me the next one. So it can be addictive when you get into that first craze, especially with books like that. It's just I envy people that are just reading that for the first time again now, because like it's such a beautiful feeling of like diving into this crazy world and seeing all the crazy things that these people can make.
Absolutely, and I had a really strange way to get to Sandman. So I had a lot of artist friends in Hungary, and one of them was a huge fan of Dave McKean, who of course did all the covers. So he just had a copy of the Dust covers, which is the collection of every issue of Sandman cover. And I remember sitting in his room just flipping through this book, and we were like, I can't even imagine what the actual comic will be like. There's no way that the comic book will live up to this crazy art. And the fact that it did is probably the miracle of comic book publishing. Like the fact that it was good enough to warrant these amazing Dave McKean covers.
It's incredible stuff, and it's funny because like the Dave McKean's artwork looks nothing like what's inside the book, so it just matches the look and feel and tone of the story so well that you just kind of like go with it in that regard. Like I was never disappointed, like seeing that cover and then opening up the book going like, oh, what is this? Like I expected this comic like to look like the cover. It's never that kind of feeling. Instead it's just like this weird sense of discovery of finding something new.
Yes, you know how some bands have the unifying look on their album covers? It's almost like that. Like it just became this mood piece to go with the book. You can imagine how different Sandman would have been with like a regular, like if the amazing artists worked on it, but if they each did just a cover with Dream posing, it would be just a very different book.
Which is like 99% of what the covers were during that time. That you're talking about like late 80s, early 90s there, and it's like, it's just a lot of like cool action shots, a lot of giant muscles and stuff. Like it's looking back on it, it's kind of a miracle that thing came together the way it did. So we're all better off for it. So it's pretty great that something like that exists and was able to kind of spread its wings in the publishing area, and that's what Vertigo really lended itself to at that time period.
Oh yes, absolutely. I would pick up any comic book because it had the Vertigo logo on it. Like it was such a staple of quality and mood and really amazing stuff.
Now, and it looks like they're trying to do a bit of a renaissance right now, kind of reinvigorating the brand a little bit because it's kind of slowed down a little, unfortunately. But it looks like they're taking some efforts to kind of revitalize it a bit more.
I couldn't be more excited. I love the idea because there's no reason why Vertigo shouldn't be like a publisher to follow closely. So yes, I think everything looks amazing so far from this new lineup.
Definitely. You had mentioned a Cronenberg. That I definitely get that vibe with some of the stuff from Observatory. Is there like certain films or something that stuck out for you that left a mark?
The Fly is.
The Fly. I'm an idiot.
Oh yeah, but it's easily it's my all-time favorite movie. My wife always makes fun of me. It's when you're feeling sick and you're sitting on the couch eating soup to feel better, and just watch Sex and the City or whatever other people watch when they're sick, I watch The Fly. Like, it just gives me, I don't know why.
That's your comfort zone.
But it's just, that is absolutely, Fly 2 as well, I have to say. It's one of the few worthy sequels. So I have a tremendous love for both of those movies.
Yeah, I think that influence kind of stands out in the book. There's a lot of Cronenbergian stuff there. Well, since these stories are so short, I think this is probably best read in short doses so you don't get too overwhelmed. It's a lot to take in, but there are elements that kind of weave in and out of the stories.
Yes, and hopefully it's a good experience to read for a second time, because there are like tiny clues here and there, like characters do show up from one story to another, but really you have to really look out for them to catch it. So I tried to make it so it would be good on repeated reading.
So are you building a shared universe here?
I am absolutely shameless about it. I am 100% building a shared universe. I guess I could have mentioned it when you asked if I'm expanding on the stories. I do not, but all of my comics somehow connect. Like, even if it's just a poster in the background from a movie that exists in one, or the corporation, the Bartok Corporation sneaks into most of my work. So yes, I realized that I'm still at the beginning of my published comic book career. Hopefully it's a career. And so I can actually build from day one this it's just for fun, but it's a loosely connected little world that you can, if you're into it, you can probably do those crazy movie diagrams with the strings and the pins on the cork board just to see how things connect, you know? Yeah, I'm having fun with it. So the book was again, because it wasn't quite designed from the ground up to be like a quote unquote properly published book. Like I really enjoyed it being a webcomic, and it was like what you said about the Cronenbergian mood popping up here and there. It was really an outlet for me to have fun and write about things that interest me, and you know. So yes, it's definitely strangely personal in that sense, that this is the stuff that I'm into. It's like, this is it.
With the Observatory getting collected, do you have any other projects in the works? I know that's the annoying interview question, as I have you here to talk about one book, and I'm asking what else you got.
Yes, I'm working on a limited series with Gergely Leposha, who is one of the artists in Observatory, and he's the childhood friend I mentioned earlier. We are working on a Hollow Earth comic that hopefully will come out sometime next year. We're still working on the first issue, but it's going to be like a somewhat realistic look at having a civilization develop in complete isolation from us underground. So it's soft horror science fiction. It's creepy and bizarre. So on brand, you know.
Will that go the webcomic route too, or would you aim to release it in single issues first?
We're not quite sure yet. So we haven't got to the point where we would. I would love to do it with floppies, but I'm not married to the idea. I really like having a trade paperback collection. It just has a much longer shelf life. You know, like your single issue comics will disappear from the stores in 7 days. You know, like that's it. So it's a really tough place to be discovered. So definitely a trade down the road, either way.
With the abundance of stories on display in the Observatory, were there any ideas that just didn't make the cut?
Surprisingly, no. It just takes a lot of Well, most of writing is thinking about your story anyway. So it just sometimes I had an idea that I couldn't quite put into that page for a couple of months, but I always worked on multiple ideas. So sometimes I had to be patient with it, and thinking about it as 3 panels really, I used it almost like as a writing tool. And sometimes I started to get creative with it. Like I came up with 3 story beats. I wrote the story. And then I was like, well, what would happen if I take away page 2, make page 3 panel 2, make panel 3 the second one, and can I push the story one more step further?
See, that sounds like a really interesting writing exercise. It's one that more people should probably try.
It was really a labor of love, so hopefully that also shows. So it never felt like a chore. It was always a puzzle. So it was something nobody was really banging on my doors if we skipped a week, so I could really take my time, so it was fine. It was really just a great outlet as a writer. So,
will you be using the same challenge for your next project too?
Oh, for this next project, I'm looking at like 22 luxurious pages to work on. Like, it's crazy how much room you have. It's
that's a big change of pace.
Oh, yes, I love. Yes, it's definitely. I have to relearn how to take advantage of this space too. But I feel like it really taught me to get rid of the filler. So I think it's kind of like with indie movies. That's a big trap. Like people struggle to stretch things out, fill it with garbage. Like I don't have time for that.
I've always felt that comics is an exercise in efficiency. The writing shouldn't be telling me something the artist is telling me, and vice versa.
Yes, hopefully. And as far as like distilling the story down, especially if you're not a writer who also draws the comic, you owe it to the artist not to waste their time. So if I ask you to draw 2 pages of people talking about Star Wars, which could be great, but it better be great. Like it's not, you can't just throw it in there to stall for time. You have to respect that because you're not paying artists professional wages, and also even the professional wages are not mind-blowing in this industry. So people are in it because they love making comics. So just respect their...
Well, mission accomplished here.
Thank you. I tried.
Okay, so Caliber Presents Volume 4, The Observatory, is due out on November 28th. It's available for pre-order now. Aside from checking out the book, where are the best places to find you online?
Yes, I am on Twitter. So my Twitter handle is at LTAMASFI. The joys of having a foreign name. Like, good luck, find me. I also have a website, which is just my name. So LaszloTamasfi.com.
Great. All right, folks, that does it for this episode of Funny Book Splatter. I have been James Ferguson with my guest, Laszlo Tamasfi. You've been listening to Funny Book Splatter, a horror comics podcast brought to you by HorrorTalk.com. We've been bringing you the best in horror since 2002. In addition to comics, we cover movies, TV shows, books, and video games. We've got news, reviews, guest features, interviews, unboxing videos, and much more. Be sure to sign up to Steve's Deals newsletter to increase your horror collection without breaking the bank. Check us out at HorrorTalk.com and at HorrorTalk on Twitter.